Did you know there are still places on Earth that no human has ever seen? Oftentimes, these aren't distant mountain peaks or remote islands, but places buried deep beneath our feet. Vast cave systems stretching for miles through solid rock. As an author of archaeological thrillers, I find this totally fascinating. Just imagine stepping into that, not knowing what you're going to find, not knowing what's waiting to be uncovered. And today, we're talking with someone who's been there. Hey, I'm Luke. I'm an author of archaeological adventure novels. I travel the world looking for stories to put into my books and to share with you right here on the Adventure Story Podcast. Now, just quickly, before we dive in, most podcasts grow through recommendations, so please share this with any adventure lovers in your life. Right, are you ready to go underground? Today, we're heading into a place that, whilst it feels alien, is right there, beneath our feet. All we have to do is just go down. But as always, we're not going alone. Our guide today is Robbie Shone, one of the world's leading cave photographers. Robbie has worked with National Geographic, Time magazine, and the European Space Agency, exploring and photographing some of the most extreme and inaccessible environments on Earth. Robbie, welcome to the Adventure Story Podcast.
Thank you, Luke. Thank you very much.
Oh, it's great to be able to have this conversation and talk about something of which I know very little. So tell me, for someone like me who's never been in a cave beyond like something of a tourist site or a grotto or something like this, what does one of these expeditions look like? What does it involve?
When you say the word expedition, an expedition can be anything from a few hours underground to several months away from home to some far-flung place, both of which have their own risks and time that you need to spend planning and preparing. But generally, when I hear the word expedition, I tend to think of a trip that takes me away from home for many weeks to some remote corner of the planet where we're likely to be isolated, living in the rainforest, for example, and exploring some really, really remote, dangerous, epic cave system that's probably never been visited by humans before. So if we talk about that, then an expedition involves a lot of planning, a lot of work beforehand, researching where you're likely to be going, understanding the team members that you're likely to be with if you haven't met them before. But typically on a big expedition, I'll know the team members. I generally only work with people that I know, I'm friends with, I trust, because it's a team. It's kind of like I say team sport. It's not a sport, but it's a team endeavor. So we work together and we try and combine all our skill sets to get to the outcome and create something that we're proud of at the end. We can show, we can record.
How many people are on this team then? You mentioned you only work with people you trust. I'm thinking 2 or 3. It must be more.
Yeah, they vary. I do trust more than 2 or 3 people. They vary. I mean, they can be 2 or 3 people if it's a day trip to, say, the Yorkshire Dales, which we wouldn't necessarily call an expedition. We'd more likely call that a day trip. And that could be likely 2 or 3 people. But then the bigger expeditions to the far-flung corners like Papua New Guinea or Malaysia, Vietnam, Venezuela, this can be up to 20, maybe 30 people. They all have their own skill set. They all come with something that they offer. Maybe there'll be a medical doctor on board as well. Generally, everyone's got their own interests, but we all come together for our love of caving, our combined shared passion for exploration underground, going somewhere where nobody's been before.
Yeah, you touched on that then. Going to somewhere where nobody has been before. That, in the modern world, is quite a challenge in itself, isn't it? What does that feel like? How do you approach that? How do you approach it doesn't quite compute with me, the idea that you'd say, we're going to go somewhere that no human has ever seen.
It's a great question. We know that we've never been there before. Humans have never been there before because a lot of these places are so remote, they're so difficult to access. So a lot of the cave entrances have been visited before. And I'm referring to places like Papua New Guinea in the rainforest, for example, where the local people will know of the cave entrances, but they won't go into them because, you need to rappel, abseil to get into these entrances so they don't have the necessary means and the skills to get into them. And yeah, we are the first people inside them. There are likely to be animals in there, bats that live in the entrance. And then we map the cave as well. We create a survey as we find it so that we can come back to the surface and create a detailed map and then record everything, produce a report so that should anybody want to go back in the future, say, for example, we run out of time and we don't explore all the passages on that one trip, it's nice to create a report with question marks on the map so that future generations can pick up the gauntlet, let's say, the baton, and go back to these places and back to those question marks and continue the exploration.
And in that way, you are like a true explorer, because this is what I imagine the explorers were thinking. We are doing this for the future generations so they know what the world is like.
Yeah, and we do not know what we're likely to find. I mean, we have some rough idea because we're all experienced cave explorers. We know what the nature of the cave's likely to be, but we still can't be absolutely sure what's around the corner. And that in itself is a feeling that I certainly think in 2026 humans don't have. I mean, we've largely explored the surface of this planet. It's all been photographed and documented from satellites in space. I was just actually watching a BBC piece about the Artemis mission where we're going to fly around the moon and come back, and we're starting this great program to bring people back to the moon to explore the surface of the moon in more detail. It got me thinking, actually, because since the Apollo missions, we haven't actually been back to the moon. We haven't truly explored space before. We go to the ISS and we work up there, and that's really important research and science. But to actually go back and put feet on the moon again, I think is such a great inspirational story that we've been living with for years because we're cave explorers. You know, we have this feeling on every expedition we go on. But I think for the public as well, to really to draw inspiration from 4 people that are going to go up to the moon, I think is incredible.
Do you feel then that, particularly in your world, there must be a sense that you could send a camera, a device, some bit of technology into the cave, and you stand there with a remote control doing the thing, right? It's probably safer, it's cheaper, it's easier, but there must be something about rappelling down there yourself, about putting boots on the ground, about breathing that air and seeing that with your own 2 eyes that is different from just seeing it on the screen of a tablet computer.
Yeah, and I'm not wanting to open the whole AI debate, but where's the fun in that? Where's the fun in sending robots or drones into these spaces? You know, we want to be there ourselves. And I've been involved in several conversations about cave photography and how I could fly drones around the caves and make pictures from here, there, and everywhere. And part of the joy I get out of my cave photography is actually being there, being in such a lofty position myself, hanging on a rope with the tripod bolted to the wall, making the picture and being there with the camera as if the camera was my best friend. We're there together creating this picture. And I don't want to send drones up. I mean, I think in certain elements, drones and robots have their place for exploration, and we shouldn't imagine a world without that technology. But I think as an explorer, there's something about having that human presence, making judgment calls from a wealth of experience that I think we can't replicate with robots.
I agree with that completely.
Not yet anyway.
And I always feel you use the technology to help you do what you do, but not to do what you do. You still do the thing,
exactly,
you know.
Exactly.
But it's doing the other stuff you could do, but you choose not to. So let's talk about these cave structures themselves. Do we actually know, or how much do we actually know about what lies beneath the ground? Could there be cave structures that are still undiscovered beneath various places or beneath the ocean or whatever?
We certainly know a lot more than we did as these caves are becoming explored. But there's still, I mean, it's difficult to say, isn't it? Like, how many undiscovered caverns are there in the world? I mean, we don't know because we've not explored them yet. We don't know. But given that there's so much limestone on the planet, now caves are formed in limestone, the rock limestone. And I think China itself holds about 1/3 of the world's limestone. And there's so much of China that's unexplored underground still. I think it's safe to say that there are definitely caves out there that haven't been explored. And that's also saying that there are caves without entrances, because there are caves that we have found that didn't actually have an entrance on the surface. They were like a geode, let's say, where they were a void underground with no connection to the surface, and they were quite happily being formed from rising warm water underneath that formed the cave, like Lechuguilla, for example, in Carlsbad Caverns National Park. So these caves might remain unexplored for eternity. But then there are other caves which do have entrances that we've just not yet got into. Maybe they're in conflict zones, maybe they're in parts of the world that's really difficult to access. There was one in Greenland, actually, that my partner, Gina Mosley, explored for the very first time 3 years ago. This entrance had been known about since 1957. It was photographed during the Cold War, but nobody had been there up until 2023, when finally she organised an expedition to go there for her climate science work. So again, there are caves that are known about that we just haven't yet got into, even today. But I do think there are spectacular, absolutely stunning, pristine environments that are there right now as we are speaking today, that are lying in darkness, that just don't yet know that they exist because we haven't been there.
That is, as a thriller writer, as a writer of books that often involve hidden things or something secret or something lost, that's like a sort of catnip to me. That's so exciting to talk about. Tell me about some of the dangers then that you face, some of the problems that you face in getting from the ground to whatever, 2 kilometers or a mile or whatever it is under the surface where you take these photos.
For the first 18 years of my cave exploration, my cave photography career, I wouldn't really have anything to talk about, if I'm honest, because I never really encountered any dangers or any issues underground in a cave. I'd read about them before, and I've got friends who are involved in cave rescues. But for me, I'd never really encountered any up until my expedition down Berezovkina, the deepest known cave in the world in Georgia, where we had this epic flood pulse that came down the cave and basically rose the water table by over 150 meters within a few hours. So we had to race for our lives and climb the ropes up to safety. And that was a terrifying ordeal. And I'd not really been aware of flash floods or how quickly caves can react to water. Obviously, I was fully aware of water and hydrology and how caves are formed all throughout the 18 years. We see that every time we go into a cave, we understand how caves are formed. But generally, you go into a cave when there might be a little bit of water running through the ground. You never get to see it where it's pretty much completely full of water. That might happen even today, it probably still happens in caves, like in India during the monsoon season, for example. The caves get completely flooded and submerged with water due to the heavy rains. But we don't go to the caves in this time because it's dangerous. So we generally explore caves when it's safe, when it's not likely to create these big flood pulses. And we weren't aware of the cave flooding in the summer when we were there, and it had been really dry. It had only been recently explored to the depth record. So the explorers, the team that were exploring the cave from Moscow in Russia, they didn't fully understand how the cave reacted to heavy rain. It had only been explored to that depth 2 years previous. So we were still learning. It just happened to be that whilst we were learning the hydrology, we had one of the most extreme flood pulses that the cave is likely to see in today's era. So we happened to be at the bottom of the cave, as bad luck would have it, when this flood pulse hit. But yeah, now the team understands the hydrology of the cave a lot better, and they don't go in times when there's likely to be heavy rain.
So tell me about that then. You're at the bottom of the cave. I'm just trying to imagine it. And a flood pulse is just water sort of arriving, coming in through the walls is what I'm imagining.
It was exactly that. The 2 team members had left the camp, the lowest camp, a day earlier. They'd gone up to camp 2, and a flood pulse passed them, and they radioed down to us. And we were all sat around camp eating breakfast. And they just said, like a giant flood pulse has raced past our camp, we advise you to just sit it out and wait for it to hit you. It's going to hit you in like 25 minutes time. So we did. We just carried on eating our pasta breakfast and thought nothing of it. It was quiet. And then after about 20, 25 minutes, we heard a rumbling sound, what sounded like a freight train on the underground. It was quiet, and then it got louder and louder, to the point where we all jumped out the tent and ran over to the ledge, this like balcony overlooking a big pit. And it was a weird feeling because it was windy. I remember there was a lot of wind, which we hadn't experienced for the week before when we were down there. And it got really, really windy. And then the rope started moving really violently up above us in the darkness. And then all of a sudden, out of the blackness came this enormous amount of white water. And then the roar, and it just fell into the pit in front of us and disappeared down into the passageways beneath. And we knew, because we'd been exploring the bottom part of the cave for the previous week, that there was a lot of space down there to take the water in. It wasn't going to fill up. And of course, the resurgence to the cave is out into the Black Sea. So there's an exit port that takes all this water. It comes down from the surface above us and disappears out of the flooded passageways into the Black Sea. And we just assumed that it would just be a big waterfall for several hours and then it would decrease in volume and go away. But of course it didn't. And after about 3 hours, the water table started rising and all the holes around camp started bubbling up with water. Yeah, I remember I turned to my assistant, Jeff Wade, who was with me at the time, and literally said, we needed to leave right now. We need to get out of here immediately. Of course, that meant we had to get kitted up because we just had our fleece clothes on. We were like warm and cozy. And we raced as fast as we could, put on our latex dry suits, which keep us dry, and then our oversuits that protect us from the sharp rocks, and then our harnesses and all our ascending equipment. And I remember I ran over to the ledge again after I'd done that, and I shouted to Peter, who was one of the team members, and I was saying, Peter, come on, you need to get dressed. We need to leave right now. And 2 team members had gone off to check out on a nearby siphon, which is the level of the water table. And they were missing. They were gone for like 20 minutes. And Peter just said, no, I will wait. I will wait for Pavel to return. And of course, I thought, well, I'm probably never going to see you again, or Pavel or Andre.
Oh, wow.
And when I got to the ledge, what had been a 20-meter drop into the horizontal passageways was now a lake, a rising lake in front of me, only about a meter beneath my feet, with the waterfall now plummeting into it. I waited until Jeff had got his equipment, his harness on, and when I saw him coming over to the ledge, I literally clipped onto the ropes and swung into the waterfall and had to climb the rope as fast as I could. But of course, the force of the waterfall plummeting onto my head felt a little bit like a tortoise going into its shell, and I could barely breathe because I couldn't look up, because I knew if I looked up, the force of the water would rip off my helmet, even though the chin strap was done up, and that would remove my headlamp as well, because my headlamp is bolted to my helmet. But the lip of the helmet, it created just enough airspace, which meant that if I didn't look up, I could still breathe. So I could climb the ropes, I could Jumar up the rope, but if I kept my head looking straight out in front of me, then I could breathe. But of course, I couldn't see the knots. I couldn't see where the knots were that I was climbing up to, which meant I had to change onto another rope. And I basically hit the knot with my Jumar, and that signaled the fact that I needed to change. But I was basically fumbling around blind. You know, I couldn't look up, I couldn't see anything. I had to change over onto the next rope and continue upwards.
Presumably you've got the rest of the team either before you or ahead of you.
They were all below me.
Right.
I was the first one. I was the first one kitted up. I also thought about this. I thought if I got stuck or if I couldn't get past an obstacle, for example, there was one passageway which was completely flooded. I had to take a deep breath and climb the rope as fast as I could to get through this squeezy section. And I knew that if I couldn't get through this, everybody else behind me would die because I was blocked like a cork in a bottle, trapped in this passageway, dead. So all this was flashing through my mind as I was climbing the rope. But eventually the rope went one way and the water dissipated a different way. So I got to some safety where I could stop and breathe and sort of gather my thoughts.
And you're deep underground at this point. Just what sort of distance is it?
In meters, it's 2,212 meters deep at the bottom of Kina, 7,600 feet or something. Yeah. And it takes 4 days to get there. It takes 4 days to get to the bottom of Kina. A little bit like climbing Mount Everest, but in reverse.
Yeah. And that's just because you have to stop. Obviously, a rope can only be a certain length, right? You have to stop for a bit.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of sections that you don't need a rope. There's a lot of sections where you can just walk or squeeze through the passageways. You cut the rope and leave that at the bottom of the previous pitch. And then squeeze through the horizontal sections before you get to the head of the next vertical drop. And that's when you start rigging the next rope. There's dozens and dozens and dozens of sections of rope in Kina. There's not one rope that goes all the way down.
I see. Yes, it's like a zigzag sort of thing.
Yeah, it's like a zigzag. But largely you are on a rope, either descending or ascending.
Yeah. That's like a thriller novel in and of itself, isn't it? Escaping the forces of nature. I imagine you have such an understanding of the power of the natural world that us surface dwellers, those of us that stay in the sunlight.
Yeah, humans have largely tamed a lot of the natural elements. And this is why I fear that climate change is going to introduce us to natural elements that we've never even imagined. We've seen them in Hollywood films, like giant tidal waves coming over, but we've never actually seen them on this planet before. But unfortunately, I think as our climate changes and our extreme weather becomes even more extreme, we're going to witness, possibly not in our lifetimes, but humans will ultimately see natural disasters that will just be unimaginable.
Yeah, it's scary stuff. It's scary stuff for sure. That was a really engaging story about Kina, and I'm there with you. What have you seen that when you've told people about it, they have found it hard to believe? They've been like, really? Are there moments when you're explaining something and you're thinking, if someone told me this, I'd be thinking that they're making this up. This can't be right. Have you anything that you've just had to pinch yourself and go, what?
Because I've been doing this kind of full time for the last 26, 27 years, there's very rarely occasions underground where I see things that I've never seen before. Of course it does happen, and I do pinch myself, especially in some of the largest chambers underground where you just can't imagine these natural spaces exist. I've shown people pictures and shown people the survey of how big these spaces are. They just can't believe them because they're members of the public. They're not familiar with caves, especially giant caves, because unfortunately, and I blame Hollywood. I always turn to Hollywood for this. But Hollywood, in my opinion, has sensationalized caves and shown largely the risks, the dangers, and they generally use tight spaces for this. They generally like to create stories where we get stuck in caves. And this is like so far from the truth. I mean, yes, there are small spaces, but cave explorers don't get stuck in caves. That's just a myth. We're more likely to be agoraphobic of the vast spaces, the huge rooms that exist out there, where we're more terrified of a void that's so big we can't imagine it underground. And that actually happened to the original explorers of a giant cave chamber called Sarawak Chamber in Malaysia. That's in 1980 when they first found it. They didn't actually know if they were underground or they'd broken back out into the surface at night, and they were surveying around a giant cliff face because it was so big and they'd been surveying for hours and hours, and they were just going around and around, and they'd not yet reached the point where they started. And they thought they were outside because there was no room, no chamber on planet Earth that had been this big before. So it freaked them out big time.
That's a fantastic story. And presumably, if you're there underground for several days, you would lose track of what time of day it is, because you've got no...
Yeah, you can do. There's an old story, a great old story of a British cave explorer called Ken Pearce, who's long since dead now. But one of his team members is still alive, Bob Toogood. Bob's in his 80s now, from Sheffield. And Bob recalls a great tale from when they were trying to dive the terminal siphon in the Gouffre Berger in the 60s, which was at the time was the deepest cave in the world. Ken Pearce would ask every team member not to wear a wristwatch and not to take a clock with them or a watch of any form. And he managed to work his men an extra day underground. He said they'd be down for a week. And because they had no idea of the time, he got 8 days out of them. I mean, a crazy leader. He would pull up the entrance pitch ladder so that the guys couldn't climb back out of the cave if they wanted to get back to the surface. Yeah, they'd had enough of him. They'd had enough because they were carrying all his diving cylinders down so that Ken could dive the terminal siphon. But it's true. I mean, if you don't carry a watch, you've got no idea of the time on the surface because... And this happened to us actually in the Gouffre Berger. We got down to the campsite, Camp 1, and we were all feeling fit. So instead of sleeping, we just decided to carry on and go and take the photographs that we planned to take. And we ended up doing a 19-hour day that day, even though we got to the camp at like 4 o'clock. So we ended up getting back to the camp, the underground camp, at like 4 o'clock in the morning. We had our dinner, and we went to bed to sleep, and we woke up at, say, 2 o'clock in the afternoon. But then that progressed throughout the next 4 or 5 days that we were underground. But luckily we had a clock with us, so we understood that it wasn't Thursday, it was actually Wednesday still. But without the watch, then we wouldn't have known. We were simply just working through the nights and sleeping through the day. And
yeah, because it makes
crazy.
Yeah, it would make no difference. Yeah, I love that. So tell me, is there a way that us non-experts could get a taste of this? particularly with these bigger spaces, because if you go to sort of the caves I live in Nottingham, so it's not far from the Peak District. There's lots of caves and old mines you can explore in that region. But they're all, from my experience, they are these tight little spaces, the sort of Hollywood types that you've described. How can we get an experience into your world? Is there even possible?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of tourist caves. So you mentioned Nottingham, you mentioned the Peak District. So in a village called Castleton in the Peak District, there are several tourist caves: Peak Cavern, Blue John, Speedwell, Treat Cliff Cavern. And I'm pretty sure all of them at some point on the tour will ask everybody to turn their lights off. They'll turn off the torch that they're using to guide the tour. And it just gives the members of the public an idea of how dark caves really are, because we think that it gets dark at night and we think that only the stars and the moon are out. But of course, there's always some kind of ambient light around. You're never truly 100% dark living on the surface of the planet. And it's only when you go underground that you experience how dark a cave can be. When you hold your hand in front of your face and it touches your nose and you still can't see your hand, that's when you know it's 100% dark. And also in a big room underground, to hear the echo. I mentioned Sarak Chamber earlier on about the largest cave chamber in the world by surface area, when those explorers didn't realize if they were back on the surface or not at night. When you're in there, for example, and you shout really loud, you hear your echo disappear after about 8 seconds, and then there's absolutely nothing, it's silent. And then a few seconds later, the echo bounces off the far wall and comes back to you. And that's incredible, because the echo's disappeared to silence and you think that's it. But then when it comes back, you realize how far away that far wall truly is. It's an incredible experience.
Wow. That sounds like it. Wow. I'm imagining it now.
I think, Luke, you get yourself to Castleton and get yourself into one of the tourist caves. They'll give you a bit of a taste of what it's like to be underground.
That needs to happen. I remember going on one in Thailand, I think, and we went into this cave. And it was like you've described. There was a point that the guide said, turn all the lights off, and it was just amazing. You slowly, everyone turns theirs off one at a time, and all of a sudden that last one goes, and it's just like a snap, isn't it? The difference between just that tiny bit of light and nothing.
Yeah. And what's magical as well is when I turn off my head torch in a cave and I watch my colleagues walk around the cave in front of me, and especially when they're hundreds and hundreds of meters away, like in a giant chamber, it's like watching stars twinkling in the night sky. They're illuminating little parts of the cave chamber, and I can see them, and they're tiny little silhouettes far away. But because I've got no light in my foreground vision, I can truly experience the scale of the chamber and see depth. It's absolutely magical.
I love that. Fantastic. Robbie, this has been so good. Tell me, what adventure stories, whether they're books or movies or legends, and I ask everyone this question on the podcast, which ones inspired your imagination and made you want to see the world in a different way, made you want to explore the world in a different way?
Yeah, that's a great question. Before I got into caving, I was following the mountaineers Alison Hargreaves and Alan Hinks. Sadly, Alison's no longer with us, but Alan certainly is. And I was fascinated by 2 books. One book about Alison's life called Regions of the Heart, that David Rose and Ed Douglas wrote. And then Matt Dickinson, who was with Alan Hinks on his Everest climb in 96, I think it was, or 95 or 96, I think it was, wrote a book called The Death Zone. And both these books fascinated me and inspired me to get outdoors. Then when I started caving, a book called Dark World by Martin Farr was kind of like the ultimate exploration adventure story about a cave in South Wales called Darren Keelow. This is a great book, and it's still an incredible story today that I often pick up. It's not a long book. I read it in one sitting. It had me hooked. It really did. Yeah, so those 3 books are definitely ones that inspired me.
Oh, fantastic. They sound great. I'll check them out. Robbie, where can people find you and your work online?
I have a website, but it's not used that often. I don't update it, sadly. Instagram, in today's world, I'm on social media. Instagram, Shone Photo is my handle. That's where I keep it up to date and keep everything going.
Wonderful. Robbie, thank you so much for your time today. It's been great.
Yeah, cheers, Luke. Thanks so much. I appreciate it. Really do.
Wow, what a story. I can just picture that. I can imagine Robbie climbing that rope with the water coming the other way, trying to escape that cave 2 kilometers underground. An incredible story. This is the Adventure Story Podcast, and I love sharing stories like that. Thank you so much for hanging out with us today. If you've enjoyed the show, please subscribe, please like, and please share. It'll take you just seconds, but really helps me spread the word about this show. If you have a story you'd like me to explore, let me know in the comments or on email at hello@lukerichardsonauthor.com. If you need more adventure in your life, and let's be honest, who doesn't? You might like to join the Adventure Society. This weekly newsletter is your ticket to travel with me, to share real-world adventures and find out first when a new story or a new season of this podcast drops. Head to lukerichardsonauthor.com/Adventure Society. And if you're a fan of adventure stories like the one we've talked about today, check out my books at lukerichardsonauthor.com. Bon voyage. Thank you so much. Enjoy the adventure, and I'll see you next time.